So maybe you're trying to make some marvelous man-made mana potions in mass, maybe even some health potions, or dice that resemble divine intervention blasts, or some icy dice. Maybe you're even trying to make some crystal blue persuasion dice. Or maybe what you need is some bolts of lightning to smite your foes. Well, okay, let's talk. If it wasn't obvious already, this video is going to be different than my normal ones. I failed on these last two projects that I've been working on over the past few weeks. I didn't like it, but I learned a lot from it, and I'm hoping that it can help you learn a lot more. So we're going to talk about what I did and cram 2 videos worth of information into one video this week, because there's a lot of info that you can gather from this without having to go through the failure steps that I did. So I'm going to jump into it, and we'll talk about the big failures towards the end. The first video I was trying to make was creating health potions and mana potions en masse, and to do that I needed a new platform for mine. So I took a 9-inch wooden round as well as this little podium thing, super glued it down, sprayed it with some super glue accelerator, and that was done in 10 seconds. So fantastic. I also wanted a second layered one so that I could get twice as many health potions into my pressure pot at one time. So I took 2 of those 9-inch rounds, a couple of little wooden dowels that you can get at the dollar store, and cut them to maybe 2 millimeters over my health potions height, just enough to slide them under there. I used super glue and accelerator to put these wooden dowels down onto the bottom platform, just like I did with the little podium. Super glue and accelerator on the top, extra super glue to make sure that it would hold itself, because it's going to be pulling up a lot of weight with resin and glass. So now we've got our 2 platforms. We can fit a ton of health potions in there. I think maximum capacity with this, I could get about 30 health potions in total. I did a check to make sure that the height would work for both of these, and it seemed to work just fine. So now we've got a platform for health potions and mana potions because they're a little bit taller. Then we can move on to actually making them. And I have nearly 80 of these little bottles because I wanted to have a bunch for the long run, because I need to make these as it's one of the tiers for my Patreon rewards. For the top tier, you either get a health potion or a mana potion. I tested out the sturdiness of my new little platform that only sat there for about 10 minutes, and it worked great. The major complaint I had from my health potion video before was that there wasn't enough resin, so I wanted to put more in there. I used some water to kind of approximate about how much I wanted to put in there, put it in the measuring cup that I was going to use. That way I could get a real good level of how much resin I was going to need for all this. Now we're going to use 2 big cups because we finally have, boom, a whole gallon of resin. I purchased a lot for this. This is Peter Brown levels of resin that we're going to be using here, and I'm using my kind of standard Art and Glow. It's just typically what I use for things. Now let's safety up. Let's put some nitrile gloves on, make sure you're wearing a respirator, and we're going to use the same mixing style that we did for my health potions before. Some red alcohol ink and silver additive. We're trying our best to mimic that color in that dice because there's going to be 2 of them in the health potion, and we're just adding some silver additive because shiny looks better. So we're mixing this into a giant disposable vessel because there's going to be a lot of resin in it, and I get mixing. Now I put a lot of silver additive in there. I'm not even sure how many drops. I just did 2 squirts. There's enough resin in here that it's not really going to make a difference, and you can see it turns that resin into a real shiny boy. And then I put a lot of red alcohol ink, talking about a lot, and even here it actually wasn't enough, so I mix it up real good and we get this nice looking red. But the reason I wanted to have that dice around is so that I could put it right next to this resin and see, is this actually red enough? And no, it was kind of orange, so I doubled up and put more red. Alcohol ink you really don't have to worry about overusing whenever you're mixing it with resin, or at least I've never had problems with it, so I didn't worry. I poured it into a smaller cup to make pouring into these little glass jars easier, and you can see I put way more resin than I did in my previous health potions, which was fantastic. And I found a way to use isopropyl alcohol to actually get any of the drips that go onto the side off with a Q-tip, so that made life a lot easier. I poured it into the rest of them, filled up the bottom layer of the actual insert, and then filled up the top layer, popped that boy into the pressure pot, and set that thing to 40 psi and left it for 24 hours overnight. Here's where we're going to get to some of the problems, but I don't know it yet. After I take these out, I don't even look at them. I'm so excited. I know that they work. I've done it before. I just take them out of the pressure pot and get to work on round 2 because bang, I've got 24 of these done. I want 48 of them done. That way I have just a few extra left over. So I pour the same exact method that we did before, mix up resin, pour it in, pop it in the pressure pot, 40 psi overnight, and bang, we've got the failure. I finally notice it. There is a dip on the side. What happens when you're using this much resin kind of contracts whenever it cures. It pulls away from the glass and leaves a little bit of a void. That's a problem that I didn't know existed, but you know what, we can try and solve that. And so I do try and solve that by using my vacuum chamber instead. I mix up the same set of resin, I pour it into 4 smaller cups so that we can actually vacuum out the air bubbles within the resin. You can definitely do this with resin, you just have to watch it and kind of adjust your vacuum. This is a sped up time-lapse version of the bubbles coming out of the resin. I left it in there for about 10 minutes, enough to where we can get essentially crystal clear resin to pour into this thing. I pour them over the top of this, and it actually works really well in terms of covering up these voids. The problem comes in, and it's not because I messed up the color. I actually did a really good job on that, pat on the back, but the problem comes in with creating almost 2 different layers, regardless of the fact of them matching up near perfectly. I don't know if it's a tiny bit of dust or what, there is a little line between the 2 layers that is noticeable. On some of them it's not, and if you're past like 6 inches away, you can't see it, but you can see above my fingernail there's a tiny little line making this look like 2 separate layers. This is going to the people who pay money for my Patreon, so I didn't feel comfortable sending it to them unless they wanted it because they wanted to get it sooner rather than wait for an updated version. So I'm going to try and redo some of these. Some of them just want to go ahead and have it now, so I will send it to them, but that's their preference. I'm happy to redo it for them. We'll come back to the health potions later. Let's move on to the mana potions. These started off in a bad juju. Half of the bottles were broken when they came into the packaging. I should have already known that there was going to be some sort of mess up on these. I changed over which dice I was going to use for these. It has a little bit more of a pearlescence, and it's a smaller die so that it actually bounces around in there more. I'm using the same exact recipe from my mana potion, except I'm also adding micro pearl to it because I wanted it to have the same luster of the new dice that are going to go in there for people. Spoiler alert, that's where this one goes wrong. I definitely should have kept it how it was, but we'll get to that in a minute. I go ahead and mix up the resin 1-to-1 parts. I put some silver additive in there, a little bit of the micro pearl, and honestly it gets a nice opalescence to it. Just some silver additive and micro pearl is a nice looking resin. I'm happy to make some dice out of that in the future, but we're going to add 2 drops of blue, enough just to get a nice light blue, almost a teal like the dice that are going to be going into the potions. Now, I thought that this looked great. I wanted to go ahead and add the mica flakes to it, and as I was mixing them up, I thought I'd put a lot in there, but I was like, just add more. Nobody's going to complain about that. And I was still right. I should have almost maybe even added more because you really couldn't see into there. I thought it looked pretty close to the dye that was going to go into the potions, and it's a good looking mixture. It's a chunky mixture as I'm pouring it in there. You can see it is a good looking mixture though. However, it is not what people were originally expecting, and I should have stopped and asked myself, is this worth doing? Is the one on the left better or is it worse? I don't know, but it's not the same. Shout out to Sequelitis. The one on the right is what people were originally expecting, and it's what I should have just recreated. If I want to keep doing the one on the left going forward, it's great. It's not nearly as shiny or magical as the one on the right, so I don't know. Again, it's kind of subjective, but it was a failure in that I didn't get what people originally wanted, so I need to make another set of those, and I was just kind of frustrated by both of the health potions and mana potions needing to be redone. So I moved on to lightning bolt dice. This is a lightning bolt D6 created by Space and Stuff on Twitter. He sent it to me, and it's awesome looking. I 3D printed it in the same way that I had in my 3D printed dice video, and I made some tiny ones, which honestly I shouldn't have done. They needed to be a little bit bigger for their size, so I reprinted them into these bigger ones here, and after they came out of the 3D printer, they needed to be cured. So I put them in my little DIY UV box for about 10 minutes. Bada bing, bada boom, they were good to go. Because the type of 3D printer I use has problems with its resin curing inside silicone, I use a product called Inhibit X to try and make sure that those 3D prints don't have a problem with silicone, and it kind of covers up their chemical properties that make the silicone not cure. But when you're dealing with this stuff, you want to make sure that you're always wearing gloves because it is not good to get on your skin. So I poured them into a little cup, let them soak up some of that Inhibit X, and then I let it dry on them, and I made a nice little stand out of foam. I thought that was great. Normally I do that twice, but I only did it once for some reason this time. I guess I was in a hurry, but I think that might have been a failure point moving forward. Either way, I pour the rest of the Inhibit X back in the bottle because it's reusable, and I'm going to use Sculpey 3 this time to actually mount the dice inside the molds. A lot of people like to use this. I'm pretty much the only one who mounts it to dice, but it's just kind of my signature at this point. I take my lightning bolts and I stick 4 of them down into one larger mold. I thought I could try and maybe save on silicone by doing this, and I wanted to experiment and see if this works. It's all about experimentation, baby. As I take 4 of these and drop them onto the Sculpey, they stick up just fine. I'm going to go ahead and mix up some Sorta Clear 12. 12. That's the silicone mold material that I'm liking to use lately, and I mix up 1:1 by volume. As I pour it in, I make sure to pour extremely slowly, especially when it's around the numbers, because this has a lot of detail. You saw in that 3D file on these dice, there's a lot of tiny details in these lightning bolts, so I wanted to make sure that I could really capture them accurately. 12 hours in the pressure pot at 40 psi, and our molds are done and good to go. I take the Sculpey right off the top of them. It leaves a nice little lip for extra resin to pool into and go into all 4 of the dice down into the mold. The one kind of had a problem with its lip, but it still had enough for resin to pool into, so I wasn't too worried about it. I take an X-Acto knife and run it along the edge of the dice, and then I'm able to take all of these dice out of there, which is fantastic. Now we can get to creating the resin. I actually liked how the resin looked on the inside of the mana potion when I mixed up the micro pearl before, so this time I do the same thing, mix some silver additive, and this time I'm using macro pearl. It's just a little bit shinier and a little bit bigger. I wanted to have a nice blue lightning bolt, as most magic things use blue lightning in TV shows and movies rather than yellow or white lightning. Before I actually tape up my molds like I usually do, I put a little bit of resin down in the bottom because they have extremely sharp tips on these lightning bolts. It's just a precaution, that way I know there's resin down in there, so when the pressure pot goes off, there's enough resin to pull into the extremely sharp tips down at the bottom. Now, I fill up the rest of the way after taping it closed, and I leave a lot of excess resin. And you can see I mixed a ton of extra resin, and that's for a reason. I wanted to have extra resin both to fill up the top and to make 2 of my fireball dice molds so that I could have some extra bolts and a full set of regular dice, because I knew that this blue was good looking and I wanted to see what it looked like in the end. Bada bing, bada boom, we have our full sets of lightning bolt dice. I knew that this was going to be a problem, but it was a far bigger problem than I expected. The tip here does not lend itself well to pulling these lightning bolt dice out of the top, so I had to snip them off from the base. I knew I was going to have to do that at some point, but it just makes it a little bit harder to get these out of there. I'm fine with the ends not being super sharp on one side. That doesn't bother me, but if it bothers you, you got to figure something out to fix them. Now, you can see these dice, there's something wrong with them. They're matte, kind of like the 3D print, which isn't the big deal, but the tips are sharp. So I thought maybe I just had a bad casting. I messed up the resin in some parts. So I snipped the non-sharp tips off and tried again. I wanted to, all right, this time make a yellow version. Since I already had a blue, why not try yellow in the same method? Maybe I messed something up. I put a little bit of yellow in there, said that's not yellow enough, and then I put a lot of yellow in there. After mixing that up, I did the same thing. I poured it down into the molds. I put the excess into the fireball molds, made sure that there was enough extra resin in the tops to fill the lips, put that thing in the pressure pot for 24 hours, and the same thing happened. I cannot tell you how frustrated I was. That was 2 weeks of no projects going right. These were supposed to roll and look absolutely amazing when they were done. They look good, but you know, that I can't even see the numbers on them. I wanted to try and paint one set of numbers on one of them to at least see what maybe they would have looked like. And you can see here, these would have been awesome. And now I can't get these glamorous shots of these amazing dice that I accomplished and made so well. And I was frustrated. I felt like I failed you all again, that I was going to go 2 weeks without something amazing to show you. But then, I don't know, I stopped and I slept on it, and I really thought back on what happened, and I realized that's not what my channel is about. My channel is about experimenting and trying new things and learning from them. I throw stuff at the wall all the time and hope that it sticks. Sometimes it does, but a lot of the times it doesn't. And a lot of people message me all the time saying, I just can't get this, I don't know. And I think it's important that they see, I don't get it like 50% of the time. You guys see maybe half of my projects, and I think it's time that I actually show you a full set of 2 that just didn't work, because not only am I showing you these 2, I think I learned more from these 2 than I did in some of my other successful projects. And so I want to recap and show you what I think I learned that's very important from these 2 projects. From the potions project, honestly, the vacuum chamber is the right tool for the job sometimes. Often we always say the pressure pot is just better, just use it. But in this bulk amount, the vacuum chamber works far better. I'm limited in the pressure pot for a 24-hour period by how much I can fit in there, maybe 30 potions. With a vacuum chamber, I could probably fill 1,000 potions in a single day if I really pushed myself, because once I pour the resin and vacuum the bubbles out of there, it's good to go, and then I can reuse the vacuum chamber over and over. So as a bulk tool, the vacuum chamber is better. For the mana potions, it's really write your recipes down as you're doing these things. Luckily, I have video logs bugs of what I'm doing, but if you're making something, trying to get the exact same product over and over is difficult if you don't have something to look back on. And sometimes experimentation isn't necessarily worth it if people are expecting one consistent product. Now, for the lightning bolt dice, I learned that placement and orientation of dice like this is very important, because making a dice mold that has a lot of dice in it, you got to figure out how to actually get them out of there. And I didn't really stop to think that through because I've never tried that before. As well, multiple layers of Inhibit X is really key. I tried it before and it worked great. I tried it less this time and it didn't. Now I know. And a final extra tip is, if you're using dyed Sculpey like I was using, don't ever let it get on your carpet, because that is a permanent stain that is not coming out. Either way, we currently live in a very negative time, and honestly, I wanted to bring some positivity out of my negativity, because really it isn't. It's just learning in a different light. And even when working on these, I actually got some things that I really love. I love my yellow kind of guiding bolt dice that came out of this, as well as these ice-base D6s. I think they look great. And one of the most gorgeous sets that I've made in a long time is this brand new blue set, and that was just with the excess resin that I had from a failed project. So really, one man's trash, another man's treasure, except this case it's both my trash and my treasure, so I'm very happy with how these turned out. Either way, I know this was a very different type of video, and if you disliked it, go ahead and dislike it. I totally understand. This isn't my normal content, but I hope I'm trying to get across that this is something that we all do, we all fail, but we really should try and learn from it, and maybe I can help you learn from it so that you don't make the same mistakes that I do. Except this time, it's a whole video on failures. I am not defeated by this. If anything, I am very motivated, and so you can bet there's going to be a round 2 for lightning bolts and for mass-made potions like this in the future. If you learned something and want to stick around, that's fantastic. If you didn't, that's totally fine too. I'm going to go take a very, very large nap, reset myself, and I'm gonna come back and knock that next project out of the park. Thank you to my patrons for their absolute immense patience. I hope that you are all staying safe. I really hope that you have a fantastic day.